Hi everyone, so recently I've been doing some more tier 149s to get my gems to 150, and I have been playing the Firebird Hydra Rift Guardian Killer. And I get a lot of questions about why I do certain things, why I play the way I do play, and I also want to show you the setup in general, just so you understand it better and maybe also do a better job with your own wizard. So first of all, here's the skill setup. It is relatively similar to a solo setup. In general, when you have these mirror image setups, you have typically the same stuff anyway, but there are a few minor differences. So we have the mirror images, we have the flame blades. I'm not going to go into all the details of the regular Firebird build. I just assume that you know that, otherwise go check out the guide. So we have the explosive blast for Orb of Infinite Depth, this is normal. We have the teleport, and we have this integrate intensify. So typically here you choose Chaos Nexus so that this beam will automatically also hit stuff around you. But in a 4-man high tier scenario, this is not what you want. You want to make sure that you have full control over the beam and not have like everything ignited at all times because of lags. Lags are a huge issue, and you have to be very careful with playing around them in massive density especially. So this is why I go with Intensify, which is also an arcane rune similar to the Chaos Nexus, so you still get the elemental exposure stack here, but you have 100% control over what you're beaming and what you're igniting, because you don't have these random beams. Which means in a big pull you have to put in a bit more effort to actually get the ignites out, but typically this is not a big deal because you don't attack into big pulls. Here we also have the Hydra with no rune. This is the only Hydra that actually works for Firebirds. So you have to choose this, and it looks like this, and shoot some fireballs, and each of those fireballs will proc the Firebird 6-piece bonus to deal damage. This is the reason why I take it. It's a pure single target ability, and it's only there for killing the boss, which is your main job in the runs. There are also other options here if you want to support your party a little bit and you don't care too much about the fast boss kill, especially if you don't go very high, let's say maybe maximum 140 or so. You can still kill bosses with just mirror images very fast, and you can have two different options. One is the slow time with time warp, 15% more damage taken. Actually there's three with the stretch time as well, 10% attack speed. This might be important for some breakpoints here and there, but right now in the meta we have Bone Spear Necromancer and Heaven's Fury Crusader, so this is not really important. And there is Exhaustion, which is 25% damage reduction for monsters. So this is extremely strong, especially if you're trying to survive with your party. Typically you have something like Magic Weapon for solo setups, but in groups you will be tanky anyway, and you typically stay out of the pull anyway, so you shouldn't really have any trouble surviving whatsoever, and you just go for the most offensive route or supporting a party. Also, compared to most of the solo setups, this uses Zay's Stone of Vengeance and not Taeguk, and you also have Power Hungry, so you're playing a ranged playstyle here, which means that when it's time to nuke on your Fire COE rotation, you pop your mirror images, you have a Hydra out, and then you TP far away and just start beaming for the Death Wish effect, so that you get Power Hungry and Zaze maximized. Also there's Conflagration, which is a 6% crit buff for your party, so this is something that you will usually apply for your DPS, and it also helps yourself a little bit. This passive is usually a bit weaker than some other choices, but since you also buff your party with this, this is actually quite useful to have. The rest of the setup looks like this, so nothing special. There's Orgulls, there's Crimson, there's Traveler's Pledge and Compass Rose and Convention. In the cube goes the Ring of Fire Grandeur and the Tasker and Theo. In solo setups you typically have the option to go Mad-Love Channeling as kind of like a offensive and defensive choice, but here you kind of have to go Taskers, but it shouldn't really worry you much because of the group buffs, and you need to reach certain breakpoints for your Hydra if you want to have the most optimal DPS output. So with a 50% Hydra there is one breakpoint at 1.65 attacks per second, and I reached that because I play with a Crusader and he has the law that gives you attack speed, and I have one ring here with attack speed. Typically you can stack even more attack speed, so you don't worry too much about this breakpoint, but you should reach at least this. And you can do this most easily when you don't have any other group buffs or anything, with just a 7% weapon roll. One ring alone is actually not enough, because the weapon roll is more valuable than a ring, because it multiplies all your other attack speed gains, in this case from Paragons, and that would actually be fine. But since you want to stack tricking quite fast, you can actually go more attack speed anyway. So you can go both rings, you can go gloves even, you can go on a weapon, and more attack speed means more stricken stacks and overall faster boss kill times. But you don't want to go all in on that, you still want a bit of cooldown just to have a bit of damage bonus on the Captain Crimson as well, and also have your mirror image rotation more smooth, because you can actually nuke a little bit in between your COE cycles. If you have 55 plus or 50+% cooldown reduction, then you can cast mirror images twice every 16 seconds and actually do a DPS rotation even without the COE. I'm going to show you a little bit like how such a run works. So most of the time you are quite passive, you try to be careful about what you ignite because you are the #1 source of lags. You also make sure that there is no air damage on you, not on any gear, not on your paragons. This is something that doesn't work for Firebird's Wizard anyway, and it just produces even more heavy lags. So you see me here trying to like flame blade around, and I'm not trying to ignite anything on purpose. So usually you try to beam into the wall or something like that, and never beam inside a pool like this. You have 30-40 monsters here, there might be some illusionist packs or something like this, but you want to go in and try to apply conflagration here for the 6% crit buff if you can. So whenever it's safe enough for you to do so, you can teleport in, get an explosive blast explosion, or maybe a flame blade into the pool once, and it will apply conflagration for a few seconds. It doesn't last very long, so be mindful about that. It's only 3 seconds, but if you know that the nuke is coming from your DPS, in this case I see the stomp happening right before the Nova starts obliterating everything, I know that this is my time to apply the 6% crit buff. And it's similar with Bone Spear, where you get the ground stomp and then the Crusader is blasting, or the Necromancer. So now that the density has been thinning out a bit, you see that I will also prepare to nuke, so I will start igniting stuff. And here's my fire COE rotation. It is definitely worth sometimes if you are close to your trash killer's COE rotation to maybe wait another second or two to make sure that you get like at least a first attack out or something to kind of like obliterate all the little trash, so that you massively decrease the risk of lagging. Because if you start attacking and you lag out the entire party, you will most likely do more harm than good, and it will also very likely lead to some deaths. And you can see here, even on a pull like this, we are lagging here. But we were also playing on prime time on a Sunday, so this was Sunday evening, and the servers are much more laggy on prime time than on other times. So this was also a bit of our mistake, but also something to be mindful about. When there's a lot of people on the servers, you will lag much more easily, and you have to make smaller pools, or you have to be more careful about what you do with your ignites. Now, as we're preparing for the next pull here, you see me trying to like walk the enemies with the party. So usually they rush ahead and they set up the new pull here. And again, I'm not igniting anything, but I'm running around to pull enemies from all directions, especially from the back usually, because the barb usually runs a bit to the side and ahead, trying to get all the monsters from there. And I just slowly walk, for example, elites with us that we want to finish off at some point, and maybe some big trash, or I just like look around whenever I can't attack. The conflagration buff is not too important, it's just something that you apply when you are around, but in general you focus more on actually supporting your party with pulling. I skipped a bit ahead here, and here you see me preparing for a nuke again. So again, we have not very many targets left. I put my images, I put my Hydra. Hydra doesn't really do much in this pull, but I just cast it anyway, and then you beam into the pull. You can also beam away from the pull when it's not so safe for the lags, because the beam is not required to actually hit anything after you have ignited stuff. It's just there for the Death Wish and for giving you arcane power on crit. But as long as it has enough arcane power, you don't really need to beam in inside the pull. And here's another new map. So we go in there and we set up the pull here in this corner. And again, I go to all the little side areas, trying to find the last enemies, get them closer without igniting anything. So it's a bit of a weird playstyle, but this is what you have to do if you want to be successful. You will very easily lag out your entire party, especially with a Crusader, but also with the Bone Spear Necro it can happen very easily. You just have a few more targets you can ignite, because Bone Spear is generally producing a bit less lag than the Heaven's Fury Crusader. So here's an example of a boss kill now. We actually have a Power Python 2, and we got Rhyme, which is not really a great boss. You typically want to have bosses that are single target and not really moving much, so something like Cold Snap or Perdition and these kind of things. but sometimes you just have to deal with it. And in general, you try to set up your nuke for your fire rotation on the convention of elements. So this will be right now, and you cast the images maybe a second or two before your fire rotation. You cast the Hydra on top of the boss, and then you make sure that your explosive blast refreshes right before you teleport away on your fire cycle. Your Orb of Infinite Death that gives you the buff from explosive blast lasts 6 seconds. So you want to make sure that you keep it up during the entire COE cycle, because it's 40% extra damage and it's also 80% damage reduction. So you don't want to go into the boss and get one-shot by something when you don't have that 80% damage reduction. So I actually mess it up here sometimes. You see that here my buff is dropping at the end of fire cycle, which is usually not too bad. Most of the time you can TP in again and then get like 2, 3, 4 stacks quite quickly again. But you want to make sure that you press the button somewhere around the start of your cold cycle, because it actually has a 1 second delay for the first explosion, and then it explodes 2 more times, half a second afterwards each. And you can see that here I refresh it. This is actually on a good time now. We get the next explosion. I cast my images and then go out, and we also have the power pylon, and now the boss will be melting here with the images and the Hydra blasting. And you see here I should have pressed explosive blast a bit earlier, so you want to press it again around 1 second before your fire convention ends, so that you can immediately go in and refresh the stacks without dropping them. But this is mostly important for your defense and not for your DPS rotation, because you have just completed your entire nuke and you just need to make sure that you don't proc or something. So it's not too bad if you mess it up at the end, but you definitely don't want to mess it up at the start. And again, you want to cast explosive blast around a second or two into cold cycle, and then again around a second before the end of fire. So here is another example of me doing that. I press the explosive blast again, I wait for the refresh, I cast my stuff and I go out and everything melts. Now typical boss fights that are like good single target bosses are actually quite fast. So even on 149 I can kill them in like 5 or 6 conventional rotations, so 1.5 minutes or so. Yeah, I do have some much worse bosses in some cases, something like Escandiel. In general, everything that moves a lot can produce problems for the mirror image AI, and also anything that spawns ads can also produce problems here. In this case we actually have a good amount of time here, and I do get some nukes in at the start when we set up the conduit that actually kills off all the ads here while the boss is CC'd and he's not really spawning much. But once there's more ads, you see that the mirror images are running around a lot. So it really comes down to playing the bosses properly. For example, something like Escandiel, you can let them spawn all the, I think, 8 ads or something. So you just wait like the first half minute of the fight, and then you can force TP him very far away to where he will not be in range of the ads anymore, because he has a maximum number of ads. It's similar with something like Crusader King, but for example, Crusader King can be interrupted by the barb, so he doesn't spawn ads to begin with. Same with Stone Singer, and there's like a few bosses like that basically, and there's some other bosses where you simply can't avoid getting ads. But here's something like this that we try. You try to run away and TP the boss so that we don't get these ads all the time. But he got a bit unlucky here and didn't do it fully properly, and we actually had ads coming after us. So in those cases you need to be far enough away. The problem with ad bosses is not just the mirror images eye, but also that you don't stack Stricken so easily on the boss, because you actually need to hit only the boss to make sure that you get the Stricken on the boss. And in those cases that's obviously not so easy. And also sometimes your mirror images are just like completely bugging out. They're running after you here as like this, and you're gonna be in trouble. Here's another example of one of those ad bosses. We have Zaxtrus, but you also had power and channeling, so my damage was like ×4 or something, and we just melted this even with all the ads around. You just need to get like, you know, some damage in there for like one big power nuke, and then that's basically it. And again, you can still try to pull the enemies and the mobs closer to the boss, and put your mirror images exactly on top of the boss, put your Hydra exactly on top of the boss, so that you actually get the attacks, and then you do the same rotation as before. And that's about it. So this was the Hydra RGK guide. I hope you enjoyed this, and it's going to help you for your own high GR groups. So again, the most important parts are Hydra is only single target, only the unruined version works. Make sure you keep up your explosive blast, Orb of Infinite Death buff, so use it at the right time, which is at the start of cold and at the end of fire, to make sure that you keep the buff rolling, and make sure that you support a group and don't ignite too many enemies. Never have more than 10 or 15 enemies ignited at a time, and rather make sure that you support a group with conflagration or by just walking and pulling enemies from all directions so that the barb and the trash killer can actually take care of them. On the boss, you can do a small DPS rotation between convention cycles, but typically you focus only on the fire nuke and you flame blade in between because you get slightly faster stricken stacks on that. And you can just properly set this up, Hydra mirror images right before fire cycle, TP out, and then beam until the fire cycle is over. And that's about it for the Wizard Hydra guide. So I hope you enjoyed this video here, and see you guys next time.